The bell above the schoolhouse door had not rung in 7 months. Not since Miss Halloway packed her trunk, married a cattle buyer from Denver, and left the town of Ashen Fork with nothing but a chalkboard full of arithmetic and 31 children who forgot her name by spring. So when it rang that Tuesday morning in the fall of 1883, every soul on Main Street turned toward the sound like it was the whistle of a train that had been late for a lifetime. I was standing outside the feed store holding a sack of oats on my shoulder when I saw her step down from old Coleman's wagon. She wore a gray traveling dress the color of river stones and a hat that had seen too much sun. She was not young in the way the men expected. She was not old in the way the women hoped. She was somewhere in between, the age when a woman has already learned what she can live without. She looked at the town the way a person looks at a letter they have been afraid to open. Then she looked at me. I do not know what she saw, a man of 46 with gray coming in at the temples, a rancher in a coat that had been mended twice at the elbows. A widower, though she could not have known that yet, a man who had not spoken a full sentence to a woman other than his sister in 9 years. She did not smile. She only nodded the way one traveler nods to another on a hard road, and I felt something turn over inside my chest, quiet and slow like a stone rolling off a grave. I did not know then that 3 months later she would stand on my porch in the middle of a snowstorm and ask me, plain as prairie wind, why a man like me had never taken a wife. And I did not know that I would look at her, at those steady brown eyes that had already seen too much of the world, and hear my own voice say the words that would change us both. I was waiting for you, but that is the end of the story. Let me tell you the beginning. My name is Elias Ward, and I have run cattle on the north bend of the Powder River since I was 22 years old. My father broke the land, and I inherited it the year he died of a cough that would not leave him. I built the house myself, board by board, one summer when I still believed a house was something a man built for a family. That was before Sarah. Sarah was my wife. She lived in that house for 3 years and 4 months, and she died on a March morning when the snow was still deep and the doctor could not reach us in time. She was carrying our first child. Neither of them lived past the sunrise. I buried them together under the cottonwood behind the barn, and I put up a wooden cross that I have replaced twice since, because wood does not last forever out here, and neither does a man's hope. That was 1874, 9 years before the bell rang. In those 9 years, the town of Ashen Fork went on without me the way a river goes on around a stone. I came in for supplies. I came in for church on Christmas and Easter because my mother, before she passed, made me promise. I nodded to folks and folks nodded back, and nobody asked me to dance at the harvest social, and nobody set a place for me at supper. Because the women of Ashen Fork had learned early that Elias Ward was a man who had already given his heart once and had not asked for it back. They called me the widower of the North Bend, though never to my face. I heard it once from a boy who did not know I was standing behind the flour barrel at the general store. His mother slapped his shoulder and hushed him. I pretended I had not heard. That is how a man survives in a small town. He pretends. The new schoolteacher's name was Miss Clara Bennett. I learned it the way everyone learned it, from Reverend Holly's at Sunday service, when he stood up and welcomed her from the pulpit and asked the congregation to make her feel at home. She sat in the third pew alone, and she did not turn her head to look at the folks staring at her. She kept her eyes forward on the cross above the altar, and I noticed she did not sing the hymns. She only mouthed the words. A woman who does not sing in church is a woman carrying something. I know because I stopped singing in 1874. The first time Clara Bennett spoke to me was on a Wednesday in early October. I had come into town to pick up a saddle I had left for repair at Emmett Doyle's leather shop, and I was crossing the street with it slung over my shoulder when I heard a small voice call my name. Not her voice, a boy's voice. Mr. Ward, sir." I turned, and there was little Tommy Pierce, the blacksmith's son, running toward me with his cap in his hand. He was maybe 8 years old, freckled, and always in trouble for something. Behind him, walking calm and unhurried, was the schoolteacher. The teacher says I gotta ask you a question for a report, Tommy said, breathing hard. She says you know more about cattle than anybody. She says I gotta write down your answer. I looked past him at Miss Bennet. She had stopped a few paces back, giving the boy room to conduct his own business. That was the first thing I noticed about her. She did not push. She let a child stand on his own feet. What's your question, son? I said. Tommy squinted at a piece of paper in his hand. How does a cow know its way home when it wanders off? I almost smiled. I had not smiled at a child's question in a long time. Well, I said, and I set my saddle down on the boardwalk so I could give the boy my full attention. A cow doesn't know the way you or I would. A cow remembers. It remembers the smell of the creek, it remembers the shape of a hill, it remembers where the salt lick is. And when it's tired and hungry and lost, it follows the memory back. Tommy scribbled furiously. Everything finds its way home if it's got a memory strong enough, I said. I did not mean it to sound the way it sounded. I looked up and Miss Bennet was watching me, not the boy, me. Her eyes were the color of good coffee and there was something in them I could not read. Not pity, not curiosity, something quieter than that. Thank you, Mr. Ward, she said. Her voice was low and even, a voice used to speaking to children without frightening them. That is a kinder answer than I expected. Kinder than what, ma'am? She almost smiled then, almost. Then most men give. She took Tommy by the shoulder and steered him gently down the street toward the schoolhouse. And I stood there on the boardwalk with my saddle at my feet and the strangest feeling in my chest. Like something I had put away a long time ago had been taken out of a drawer and held up to the light. I did not sleep well that night. I sat on my porch until the stars came out and I watched the wind move through the tall grass. And I thought about the way she had said, kinder than most men give, as though she had known plenty of men who gave less. The gossip started before the leaves were fully down. That is the way of small towns. A man and a woman need only exchange 2 civil words in the street, and by supper the whole valley has them engaged. By breakfast they are estranged. By the following Sunday they are scandalous. It was Mrs. Alma Truitt who took the first swing, and Mrs. Truitt swung hard. She was the wife of the town banker, and she had a daughter of 24 named Louisa, who was pretty in the way an unopened envelope is pretty, and who had, for the past 2 years, been quietly and unsuccessfully aimed in my direction like a rifle that will not fire. I heard about it from my sister Ruth, who lives on a small place east of town with her husband Amos and their 4 children. Ruth came out to the ranch one Saturday afternoon with a basket of biscuits and a face that meant she had news I was not going to enjoy. Alma Truitt is telling folks the schoolteacher is chasing you, she said, sitting down at my kitchen table without being invited, which is the privilege of sisters. That's a lie, I said. I know it's a lie, that's why I'm telling you so you know what's being said. I poured her a cup of coffee. My hand was steadier than I expected. What else is being said? Ruth looked at me for a long moment. She has our mother's eyes, dark and patient and honest. They say Miss Bennet came out here from Missouri because there was some kind of trouble, nobody knows what, but Alma is telling folks the woman has a past. Every woman has a past, Ruth. Every man too, I know that, but you know how folks are. If she came here running from something, they will find out and they will make her pay for it. I set my coffee down. Has she done anything to deserve it? Not that anyone can name. She teaches the children. She keeps to herself. She takes her Sunday dinners alone at the boarding house. That's her whole crime, Elias. She keeps to herself, and that makes people nervous. I thought about the way Miss Bennet had mouthed the words of the hymns without singing them. A woman carrying something. Ruth, I said, if you hear anything true about her, will you tell me? My sister studied me across the table. She did not smile, but her eyes softened in a way that made me want to look away. Elias, she said quietly, you have not asked me about a woman in 9 years. I am not asking about a woman. I am asking about a person the town is preparing to hurt. Yes, Ruth said, and she reached across the table and put her hand on mine the way our mother used to. Yes. Of course you are. November came in cold that year. The cottonwoods by the river turned yellow, then bare, and the wind off the mountains carried the first taste of winter down into the valley. I found excuses to be in town more often than I needed to be: a bag of nails, a tin of coffee, a newspaper I did not read. I told myself I was just tending to matters I was not. I was hoping to see her. I saw her 3 times that month, and each time we spoke a little longer. Once outside the post office where she was mailing a letter and would not tell me to whom. Once at the general store where she was buying a book of poems by a man named Whitman that I had never heard of. Once at the churchyard where she was standing before the grave of a child I had not known, a little girl who had died the winter before I moved to the valley. That last time at the churchyard was the one that broke something loose in me. She did not hear me come up behind her. She was standing very still, her gloved hands folded at her waist, and she was looking down at the small stone with an expression I recognized. I had worn it myself, standing at my own graves for 9 years. "Ma'am," I said softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned. Her eyes were wet, but she did not look ashamed of it. "Mr. Ward, I did not mean to disturb you." "You have not." She looked back at the stone. I did not know her. I only read her name, and I thought it seemed a lonely name to lie alone under a stone with no one visiting. I looked at the stone: Mary Ellen Prescott, born 1876, died 1879, beloved, that was all. "You visit graves of children you did not know?" I asked. "Sometimes." She was quiet a moment. "Someone should." I did not answer that. I could not. She turned to face me fully then, and there was a directness in her eyes that was not rude but was not shy either. "May I ask you a question, Mr. Ward?" "Yes, ma'am." "Are you the man they call the widower of the North Bend?" I felt the old ache turn over in my chest. "I have heard myself called that." "I am sorry for asking for your loss, whatever it was." "Whenever it was." I looked at her, at this woman I had known for 6 weeks and had spoken to for perhaps a total of 30 minutes. And I said something I had never said out loud to anyone in Ashen Fork. Her name was Sarah. She was 24. Our child was a boy. I named him after my father, though he never drew a breath. That was 9 years ago last March. Clara Bennett did not flinch. She did not say she was sorry again. She did not offer any of the empty words that people offer when they do not know what else to say. She only looked at me with those steady brown eyes, and she nodded once, slow, the way a person nods when they understand a language that most folks have never had to learn. "Thank you for telling me," she said, and that was all. She walked past me out of the churchyard, and I stood there until the sun went down behind the ridge, and I understood, without being able to say why, that I had just told the right person. The snowstorm came on the 18th of December. It was a bad one, the kind that starts as a whisper at breakfast and by supper is howling like a wolf at the door. I had brought my cattle down from the high pasture 2 weeks before, thank God, and they were safe in the lower field with the windbreak. I had firewood stacked to the eaves and enough salt pork and beans to last a month. A man alone learns to prepare. I was reading by the fire when I heard the knock. At first I thought it was a branch against the porch. Then it came again, 3 sharp raps, and I stood up so fast my book fell to the floor. Nobody comes out to the North Bend in a snowstorm, nobody. I opened the door and there she was. Clara Bennett, wrapped in a wool coat 2 sizes too big for her, snow crusted on her hat and her eyelashes, her cheeks red as apples and her lips near blue. Behind her, tied to my porch rail, was a mule I recognized as belonging to old Coleman. The mule was steaming. "Miss Bennett," I said, and I could not think of another word. "Mr. Ward," her voice was shaking but her eyes were steady. "I am sorry to trouble you. I would not have come, but I had to ask you something and I could not wait until spring. Get inside. Get inside this house right now." I pulled her in and shut the door against the wind. I sat her down by the fire and I put a blanket around her shoulders and I heated coffee on the stove without asking if she wanted any, because she was going to have some whether she wanted it or not. She let me do all of this without protest. She only watched me move around the kitchen, and when I finally put the cup in her hands, she looked up at me and said very quietly, you are a kind man. Mr. Ward, I am a man who does not want a woman freezing to death on his porch. That is not kindness, that is common sense. You keep calling it common sense, she said, but I know what it feels like when somebody finally sees you. I sat down across from her. The fire cracked between us. Outside, the wind was screaming, but inside my kitchen it was suddenly very quiet. Why did you come, Miss Bennet? She looked into the fire for a long moment before she answered. I came because tomorrow the whole town is going to know something about me and I wanted you to hear it from me first. I waited. My name is Clara Bennet, that part is true. I am 29 years old, that part is true. I was a schoolteacher in a town called Willow Ridge in Missouri, that part is true also. She took a breath. What is also true is that 4 years ago I was engaged to be married to a man named Samuel Hardy. He was a lawyer. Everyone in the town admired him. 2 weeks before the wedding, he was arrested for embezzling from the bank where his father was a director. He hanged himself in his cell before the trial. And the town, Mr. Ward, the town decided that I must have known, that I was part of it, that a woman engaged to a thief must be a thief herself. Her voice did not shake. She had told this story before to herself many times. I lost my position at the school, I lost the friendship of every family I had known. My own father would not let me sit at his supper table because his customers had begun to whisper. I stayed 1 more year, Mr. Ward, 1 more year, and then I could not stay any longer. I answered an advertisement in a paper. Ashen Fork needed a teacher. I came here to begin again. She looked up at me. Tomorrow, the coach from Cheyenne will bring the December mail. And in that mail will be a letter that I know is coming because a woman in Willow Ridge who was once my friend wrote to warn me. Someone from my old town has written to Reverend Hollies and to Mrs. Alma Truitt telling them what I have just told you, only they will not tell it the way I have told it. They will tell it the way the town told it. The fire popped. I did not move. I did not come out here in a snowstorm to ask you for anything, Mr. Ward. I came out here because you told me about Sarah and about your son, and you told me the truth. And I could not stand the thought that tomorrow you would hear a lie about me and I would not have given you the chance to hear the truth first. She set her coffee cup down. Her hands were still trembling, but not from the cold anymore. That is why I came. I looked at her for a long time. The wind pushed against the window. The fire burned low and I got up and put another log on it because I needed something to do with my hands. Then I sat back down and I said, "May I ask you a question now, Miss Bennet?" "Yes, why did you never marry after all that?" She almost laughed. It was a small, tired sound. "Because I never met a man who did not look at me and see the story other people had told him first." I nodded. I understood that. I understood it better than she could have known. "And you?" she said. "May I ask you the same? Why did you never marry again, Mr. Ward, after Sarah, after 9 years? You are not an old man, you are not an unkind one. Why did you never take another wife?" And I looked at her, at the snow melting in her hair, at the coffee cup she was holding with both hands because they were still cold. At the steady brown eyes of a woman who had been called things she did not deserve and had crossed half a country to try again. And I heard my own voice, quiet and sure, say the words that had been waiting inside me for 9 years. "I was waiting for you." She did not answer right away. She sat very still and her eyes filled and she looked down at her hands, and for a long moment I was afraid I had frightened her, said too much. Moved too fast for a woman who had already been hurt by moving too fast once before. Then she said without looking up, "You do not even know me." "Mr. Ward, I know enough. You know a story I told you in one evening. I know a woman who came out through a snowstorm because she did not want a man to hear a lie about her before he heard the truth. I know a woman who visits the graves of children she did not know because someone should. I know a woman who mouths the words of hymns because she has stopped believing God is listening, but she comes to church anyway because she has not stopped hoping he might start again. I know enough, Miss Bennet. I have known enough since October." She was crying then, quietly, without sound. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. I cannot let you say this to me tonight, she said. Not tonight, not when I am cold and afraid and grateful. If you say it tonight and you wake tomorrow and change your mind, it will kill me. I have already been killed once by a man's opinion. I cannot do it a second time. Then I will say it tomorrow, I said, and the day after. And every day until you believe I mean it. She looked up at me then, really looked, and I saw something in her face that I had not seen in another human being's face in 9 years. I saw a woman deciding to hope. I made her a bed by the fire that night. I slept in the barn with the horses, because a man does what a man ought to do, and because the town would talk enough already without me giving it more to talk about. In the morning the storm had passed and the world was white and hard and beautiful, and I hitched up the wagon and I drove her back into town myself in daylight with my head high, so that anyone who cared to look could see that Elias Ward had brought the schoolteacher home from a mercy stop in a snowstorm, and that was all any decent soul had a right to say about it. The letter came on the coach that afternoon just as she had said it would. By evening Mrs. Alma Truitt had read it aloud to 3 different women on 3 different porches, and by the next morning Reverend Hollis had called a meeting of the school board. And by that Sunday there was talk of dismissing Miss Bennet from her position, on grounds of moral character. I put on my father's coat, the black one he had worn to funerals and weddings, and I walked into the church board meeting on Monday evening uninvited. Reverend Hollis looked up in surprise. Mrs. Truitt looked at me with the tight, pinched face of a woman who has been interrupted mid-verdict. Elias, the Reverend said, this is a closed meeting. I know it is, Reverend. I will only take a minute. I did not sit down. I stood at the end of the long table where they had gathered, 7 of them, 6 men and Mrs. Truitt, and I looked at each of them in turn. Miss Bennet told me her whole story 2 nights ago, I said, before any of you had heard a word of it. She rode out to my ranch in a snowstorm to tell me herself because she did not want me to hear a lie first. That is not the act of a guilty woman. That is the act of the most honest person I have met in 9 years of living in this valley. Nobody spoke. You are about to punish a woman for the crime of another man, a man she did not marry. A man she did not know was a thief, a man who took his own life before she could even understand what he had done to her. You are about to do to her here what a whole other town already did to her once. And I am asking you as a man who has lived among you and buried his own family among you not to do it. Mrs. Truitt found her voice. Elias Ward, this is not your business. I looked at her. I did not raise my voice. Alma, I said, I intend to marry her if she will have me. That makes it my business. There was a sound around the table like a small collective breath being taken and not let out. Reverend Hollis set his pen down very carefully. Elias, he said, have you asked her? Not yet, I am asking her tomorrow. I wanted to speak to you first so that when the town hears it they will hear it from me and not from a letter written by strangers 1,000 miles away. I put on my hat. I nodded to the Reverend. I did not look at Mrs. Truitt again. Good evening, gentlemen. Ma'am. I walked out into the cold and behind me I heard Reverend Hollis clear his throat and say, in a voice I was not meant to hear but heard anyway, I believe this meeting is concluded. I asked her the next morning on the steps of the schoolhouse before the children arrived. I did not kneel because I am too old to kneel and get up gracefully, and I did not want the moment ruined by a bad knee. I stood in front of her with my hat in my hands and I said, Clara Bennet, I am 46 years old. I have a good ranch and a plain house and a barn that needs painting. I have a grave under a cottonwood tree that I visit every Sunday, and I will not stop visiting it, because a man does not stop honoring what he has lost in order to honor what he has found. But I have room, Clara. I have room in that house and I have room at that table and I have room in my life, and I have been keeping that room for a long time without knowing who it was for. I know now. I want it to be you. Will you marry me? She looked at me for a long moment. The wind moved her hair. Somewhere down the street a dog barked. The first of the children was coming up the road with a lunch pail swinging from one hand. Yes, Elias, she said quietly, "I will," that was all. No tears this time, no trembling, just yes. We married in April when the cottonwoods were budding. Reverend Hollies performed the service, and my sister Ruth stood up with Clara, and Amos stood up with me, and the church was fuller than I expected. Mrs. Alma Truitt did not come. Her daughter Louisa did, and she brought us a set of dish towels she had embroidered herself, and she kissed Clara on the cheek and wished her joy. And I thought better of Louisa Truitt that day than I ever had before. We rode out to the ranch in the afternoon in my wagon with the sun setting behind the ridge. And when we came over the last rise and the house appeared below us with the cottonwoods on one side and the barn on the other, Clara reached over and took my hand. She did not say anything, she did not have to. I took her out to the grave that evening before the light was gone. I did not ask her to come, she asked me. She said she wanted to meet Sarah in the only way that was left to meet her. So we walked out together, and I stood back a little way, and Clara knelt down in the grass in her wedding dress, and she put her hand on the wooden cross. And she spoke to my first wife the way one woman speaks to another. I could not hear what she said, I did not try, that was between the two of them. When she stood up, her eyes were shining, but she was not crying. She came back to me and took my arm, and we walked back to the house together in the last light of the day. She would have liked you, I said. I know, Clara said. I told her so. We have been married 11 years now. It is the fall of 1894, and I am 57 years old, and there is more gray in my beard than brown. And Clara has fine lines at the corners of her eyes that were not there when she stepped down from old Coleman's wagon in that gray traveling dress. We had a daughter in the second year. We named her Sarah Ellen because Clara said a name is not a wound if you say it with love, and we needed to say Sarah with love again in this house. Sarah Ellen is 9 now, and she reads better than any child in the county because her mother is still the school teacher, and her mother does not tolerate lazy reading. The town has forgotten most of what it once said. Small towns are like that. They forget the stories they were once so certain of because new stories come along and the old ones cannot compete. Mrs. Alma Truitt died 3 years ago of a fever, and Clara took a pie to the funeral and cried when they lowered the box, because Clara is a better woman than most of us. And she does not carry grudges into graveyards. I still visit the Cottonwood every Sunday. Clara comes with me now most weeks. Sarah Ellen comes too, and she puts a wildflower on the cross in the summer and a sprig of pine in the winter, and she asks questions about the brother she never had, and we answer them honestly. Because a child raised on truth is a child who grows up strong. I have thought a great deal in these 11 years about what I said that night by the fire. I was waiting for you. I did not know at the time whether it was true or whether it was only something my heart said because it needed to say something. But I know now it was true. I was not waiting for a woman. I was waiting for the right woman. I was waiting for the one person on this earth who would look at me and see not the widower of the North Bend, not the man who had already given his heart once, but the man who still had a heart left to give. And she was waiting too. She was waiting all those years in Missouri for someone who would look at her and see not the fiancé of a thief, not the woman with a past, but the honest soul who had crossed a snowstorm to tell the truth to a stranger. We were both waiting, we did not know it, but the years we spent alone were not wasted years. They were the years that made us ready. That is the thing about second chances, friends. They do not come to the young do not need them. Second chances come to those of us who have already loved and lost, who have already been judged and cast out, who have already stopped believing that anything good is still coming down the road. Second chances come quietly in gray traveling dresses, in the ring of a bell that had not rung in 7 months, in a knock on the door in the middle of a snowstorm. If you are waiting still, do not be ashamed of it. The right person is worth the wait, and the years you spent alone are not lost years. They are the years the good Lord used to shape you into someone worth finding. Thank you for riding along with me tonight, friends. If this story warmed something inside you or reminded you of someone you have loved or someone you are still hoping for, stay close to this fire. There are more tales to tell, and this old saddle has plenty of road left in it. Until next time, keep writing.